faces online today, but also great to welcome a number of new organisations and people to the forum as well. So welcome to you. For those of you who aren't familiar with Cohesion, and I suppose this is new to us, Cohesion are market specialists in early talent recruitment, and obviously we provide a wide array of services from school outreach right the way through assessment and onboarding, pre-boarding, etc. And we run these sessions every sort of 8 to 10 weeks and look at key topics and specific areas of debate. And obviously we include in that students from universities, universities themselves, hiring organizations and technology platforms, and obviously hear their thoughts and sort of share their best practice and lessons learned. So today's topic is going to be looking at the impact of sort of obviously COVID-19. You will have noticed that on the invites going out, we use the word post-COVID. Slightly ironically, when we decided to do this event, lots of people were being vaccinated, and it looks like, you know, very few new people sort of picking up the virus. We fast forward a little bit, and obviously the situation today is slightly different. So sadly, children are still isolating from schools, and new variants are sort of ripping around the country. But I think the lessons that we've learned over the last 18 months, and what we're going to be looking at a little bit today, is still absolutely relevant. So I'm sure, like many people online today, I was on the ISE conference last week, and we were talking to a number of organizations there. And I think what's interesting is that over the last 18 months, our industry has been impacted hugely by COVID and all the sort of knock-on consequences of that. And obviously students and undergraduates and school leavers especially. But I think what we've really got to do as an industry is to debate and look at what things we've put in place and had to adopt and have bettered the process, and what things probably we would like to revert back to. And I think that rate of adaptation and that business adaptation is a critical factor. But I think from my perspective, and I know that of Cohesion, what we've really got to embrace and what we've really got to sort of take ownership and responsibility for is the fact that no matter how much technology we adopt and how many, you know, it's very easy to look at efficiencies and costs and sort of various elements of the process. The one thing that we've absolutely got to remain as a key factor is that human-centric process. With what we do, everything has got to revolve around the students and the people that we're putting through the process. And I know we've got a number of clients online today who are Cohesion clients, and hopefully they'll all agree. I think the one thing that sort of sets us apart is that human touch, and we've got to, you know, we've really got to, as an industry, keep that sort of human touch and sort of that human-orientated service around the process. So without further ado, just to sort of introduce today's speakers. So first of all, I'm going to hand over in a minute to Becky Hopwood at UCAS. Over the last 3 or 4 months, Cohesion have taken part and joined forces with UCAS to do a huge piece of research looking at candidate motivations, what things are important to students coming through school and leaving university at the moment. And I know Becky's going to be sharing with us some of the insight from that. So really looking forward to sharing that insight with you. We're then going to have Victoria from Samworth Brothers. Samworth Brothers are one of the UK's leading food manufacturers. So we're going to be looking through the lens of an employer, what impact COVID has had on them, whether that be change in application numbers, change in process, etc. And then finally, we're going to be hearing from Tom. Tom is the chief executive of a technology company called Tazio. And again, technology has been an absolute, been central to this change that we've all had to adopt and how quickly we've had to adopt. So it'll be really interesting to hear from Tom about some of the changes that they've put in place, and I suppose where the market is heading. So that's a brief introduction. So on with the show, I'm now going to hand over to Becky at UCAS. So Becky, over to you.
Thank you, James. And as a mum who's had to rush around and collect her son from school this morning because he's now isolating, I can definitely say that we're not post-COVID. But thanks for the introduction. Like James said, I'm head of sales at UCAS. I'm sure most people on the webinar are familiar with UCAS in terms of university and college admission surveys for entry into undergraduate education. But actually our remit and our vision is much bigger than that. I'm going to share with you the results of some surveys today that look at how early talent recruitment has changed post-COVID, and we looked at a number of different audiences to get their different takes and their different motivations. If you can see from the next slide, why I want to talk to you about early careers recruitment and what our place is in this market as UCAS is that one of our strategic goals for 2025 is to be the go-to place for post-18 choices in the UK. So that is much more than degrees and university. It's looking at apprenticeships, the world of work, lots of other options, and there are lots of choices available for students now. The quote shown on this slide is taken from our chief executive that clearly articulates our ambition in this place. And you may have seen an article recently on the front page of the Times where we talked about outdated stigma around apprenticeships and vocational qualifications, and our ambition to offer more parity of visibility for young people and mature learners in that space. Okay, so moving on. The survey results, just to give you a bit of background, they were collated from over about 3,000 respondents. So we looked at 3 different audiences. We looked at 16, 17-year-olds in May. We looked at recent graduates, so people who'd graduated in 2020. And we looked at final year students, and that survey was completed in June. And that was those going into their final year. Okay, so if we start with the graduates, of the graduate cohort, these were people, like I said, graduated in 2020. 58% said COVID impacted the choice of what to do after graduation, and 50% said it made it harder for them to find a job. So that real decline in the recruitment market was really felt by those people. They find it really difficult to find a role. Just move on to the next slide, thank you. There were a reduced number of vacancies, and some students, graduates, stating that their graduate role or perhaps their internship had in fact been cancelled. So these were some of the free text responses. So things like they were unable to find internships, they couldn't go travelling. It really did feel like the options were limited for them. If I move on to final year students now, what we see is these are the students who still have 1 year left. 48% specifically referenced COVID, so all those bars indicated in green as impacting their plans. In addition, 28% referenced fewer graduate jobs as the reason, which, like we know, is a byproduct of the impact of COVID. Also, based on feedback, many students had enough of studying, so they'd switched to online learning. They were really feeling that that wasn't a great experience for them, and that was impacting the choice of what they wanted to do next. The next slide shows some more of those free text responses. So you can see from the first bubble on the top left, where the experience of online learning has put someone off their course choices and their career choices for the future. Many comments are around the lack of jobs in their chosen field, but there were also some positive outcomes. If you look at the bubble on the top right, where it changed for the better. The bottom 2 speech bubbles on this slide are put in there specifically because they showed the opposite effect. So one is saying that someone has planned not to do a master's degree, and the other one is saying that someone had changed their plan and was going to go and do a master's degree. So people's choices were changing, but depending on their individual circumstances, it might change depending on what they wanted to do. Overall, though, if we look at the next slide, what we can see is that the year-on-year figures show quite a similar picture. So in terms of percentage of what people plan to do, both pre and post-COVID, some of those people changing around, it had a sort of balancing effect. What we can see is things like, understandably, travel, for example, and those looking to work abroad was down, but we'd absolutely expect that. One thing we can say about final year students is they have been resolute throughout. It hasn't massively veered them off course. they have stuck to their plans. So they do have quite a longer term view of things. We'll drill down now into just some subject trends and look at particular subjects and particular industries. The most popular subjects are largely similar year on year, so it hasn't changed too much between the sort of 2020, 2021 graduates. However, what did surprise me on this slide was that creative art and design was the most popular in 2021, which, given the impact on sort of creative roles and creative industries, I found that quite surprising. Healthcare has dropped down in 2021 to second place, but overall the percentage has increased. And healthcare in the younger age group is also quite a big percentage, so 25% for 16, 17-year-olds. That follows the trend we're seeing in terms of undergraduate applications into courses like nursing as well, which we've just released our 30th of June deadline stats today, and it's been a record year for nursing applicants with over 70,000. So those key worker industries really benefiting from the post-COVID world. Moving on to the next slide, and this was a question where we asked both final year students and graduates what was most important to them when looking for a graduate job. And for both audiences, what we see is that long-term career prospects and job security came out on top, way above anything else. Training development was really up there as well. So it's consistent for both groups and far outweighs the other options, which is not a surprise given the current situation. We see that trend in university applicants as well, who are picking their courses based on the career prospects. So transition between final year and graduates. Mental health and well-being are also really up there and really important for both audiences. Interestingly, graduates, so the people sort of in the graduate market right now, did not consider starting salary as is important as final year students. So reflective of the current market, and final year students, so those are a year younger, I'd rank sustainability as more important. So they are looking at things like corporate social responsibility, employer brand of employers and industries, for example. So some really interesting trends between the final year and the graduate audience. In terms of timings and when people are starting to look for a job, if you look at the next slide, what we have seen is that research is starting earlier. So for 2021, that's shown in green on the graph. As you can see, most people start to search in the first term of the final year, but the green bar on the left-hand side for people starting their research before the end of the last academic year has increased. And what that says is that students are trying to be more prepared. What that means for employers is if you're looking to attract that audience, it's important to have that information available and those engagement opportunities available much earlier. The audience we're dealing with expects always on content, but it's worth considering timings around things like application windows. Because if you go too late, there is a danger that you could miss some of that top talent that perhaps has started their research a bit earlier. Okay, so what else have our surveys told us? Moving on to that slightly younger audience and looking at more specifically at apprenticeships. So interest in apprenticeships is increasing. We are seeing that massively in our audience. So over half of students who are 16, 17 interested in applying for 2022 have indicated to us that they're interested in apprenticeships. They're considering apprenticeships at the same time. Not surprisingly, COVID's impacted apprenticeship availability. So starts in sectors that were perhaps shut down during COVID fell quite significantly. I think the numbers are something like 70% between March and July 2020. Other sectors more like 40%. And not only is there an increase in demand, there's also a rise in the number of 18-year-olds in the UK. So the overall number of people who are interested is much, much higher. However, they're hungry for information, they want information, but they're finding it hard to get. So recently at UCAS, and I have shared some of this at the ISE conference, so apologies if some of you have seen this twice, but it's still useful and relevant. We ran a report on student choices recently that indicated a third of students did not receive any information about apprenticeships from their school or college. So you can see from this bar chart that there's a clear difference in access to information on apprenticeships versus university, with 1 in 5 indicating it's somewhat difficult or very difficult to get information on apprenticeships. We know teachers are working hard to inform students, but the research does show that the Baker Clause is not being implemented consistently, and there's more scope for employers, UCAS sector bodies, for example, to help provide more comprehensive information, more advice for students, and help them make more aspirational choices. You can see on this slide that not only do the audience want more advice, they're also looking for it earlier. So again, earlier pre-GCSE for 60%. The research also indicated that the lower polar quintile groups, so those are the groups with the lower participation rates in HE, are being underserved. So 43% from polar quintile 1 report that more information would have helped them make better choices, compared to 37% of those from polar quintile 5. So it's more likely to affect disadvantaged students. Unfortunately, reputation does continue to be an issue for apprenticeships. Only 8% more strongly associate apprenticeships with leading to a good job compared to university degrees. And we talked earlier about the importance of career prospects and long-term job opportunities. So clearly more needs to be done to articulate the benefits of apprenticeship. So for example, explaining that apprenticeship is a job with training and the future career path that could lead on. Alongside that, it's really important to continue the engagement with influencers, so teachers and parents, working with schools that I know a lot of employers do. It's really important to continue that engagement. If I move on to the next slide. Brilliant, thank you. I've included one of the ways that UCAS is helping to provide that information, and it's a bit of a shameless plug here for our Career Finder service, which is a free to use service for all employers. We list apprenticeship vacancies. We have 70,000 users. The application rate is fluctuating between sort of 17 and 20% at the minute. And we've seen, in terms of growth, we've seen a massive increase, 37% increase in job views year on year, and a 24% increase in applications. So, the behavior of applicants or young people really showing that demand for information and looking for that information. So what does this mean for employers? So in terms of what students are looking for from employers, and the things you need to start to think about, or think about alongside everything else you're doing already, is that there is a real practical versus emotional need from our audience. There is a mix of motivations. So they do want the facts. They do want to know about the future earning potential. They want to know about that long-term career prospects. They want to know how the process works and that sort of practical elements of an apprenticeship. So it's important that you include all of that. However, just move on to the next slide. There are emotional needs at play as well. So this audience, they're hungry for detail, but they're hungry for reassurance. And COVID has had a much bigger impact on that. So they want to know that they're going to be part of a team. They want to know that they're going to fit in. It's a bit like we see this with university students as well, where they feel like they need to find their tribe. They need to feel like there's students, there's people like them. And there's quite a scarcity of information on the social aspect of apprenticeships. They have a real need for connection, group membership. They need to think that they'll make friends for life if they take the apprenticeship route, so that they're not missing out on that versus perhaps what they might consider from a more traditional university route. They want to believe they can do apprenticeships, and that there is still the opportunity to move away from the family home, for example. So it's really important to think about that sort of broad content. And then Finally, I just wanted to sort of summarize in 3 quick points a lot of the themes that have come through for employers in terms of communicating with these different audiences. Ultimately, they're looking for information earlier, and there's a real scarcity of it. They want that broader information, so they want information about pathways, they want the information about the emotional aspects, and they expect a level of personalization. They expect it to be useful and relevant to them. So that makes it easy for them to really digest and follow that pathway. Hopefully that's given you a good flavor, a good insight into a number of different aspects across all those different audience groups. I'm going to hand back to James now, but my contact details are on the slide, so please do get in touch if you've got any questions, and I believe we are sharing the content from the webinar after.
Absolutely, Becky. Yeah, thank you very much for that. I mean, there's a huge amount of data that you shared there, and that's hard to do in 15 minutes, but that gave a really sort of clear and concise kind of viewpoint, I think, from the candidates and school leavers coming through. And I think, you know, the resounding fact around all of this is it really, I suppose, hammers home that the profile and I suppose the group that have been affected hardest within this impact is very often the students. So thank you very much for that, Becky. Exactly as Becky's just mentioned, at the end of the event, we're going to be sharing all of those slides. I don't know if everyone's been frantically taking down some of those notes, but we're going to be sharing all of the content at the end. Also, I forgot to mention at the beginning, but it's great to see people have taken the initiative. As ever, we'll hopefully have 4 or 5 minutes at the end of today's session to answer any questions that you may have. So in the chat box, and I think Brian and Ben from STEM 10 have already started to do this, but if you're able to post any questions and sort of who you are, what organization you're from, we're going to hopefully be able to answer some of your questions at the end. So Becky, thank you very much for that. I'm now going to hand over to Victoria at Samworth Brothers. Victoria is going to talk us through, I suppose, from the client's perspective, what impact they've seen over the last 18 months as well. So Victoria, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And yeah, thank you, Becky, because I was taking furious notes and I've already got action points. So I wanted to just share a little bit from our corner of the world. You might not know Samworth Brothers. If you do drive down the M1 or the M5 regularly, those cream trucks that you can see on the bottom left there will become a feature of your world. And we have a lot of trucks on the road, and once you know about them, you can't help but spot them. So if you want to go next slide for me, please. Just a little bit about us then. We're a 4th generation family business, started in a butcher's shop in Birmingham and then grew exponentially over the years. So we're now right across the UK, 14 bakeries and kitchens, as it says there, and we've got now tipping towards the 11,000 colleagues in our team. So moving on, this is a bit of a picture of behind the scenes. So we're chilled food manufacturer, which means that everything has got a short sell-by date and everyone has to do everything very quickly to make sure that we hit the shelves and hit expectations. So in terms of the different types of food that we've got, you can see there it's quite a broad portfolio. Everything across the top is own label, which means that you probably eat our food all the time and don't really realise that it's Samworth Brothers that produce that. So if you're a fan of the Tesco's Finest range, we produce about 80% of that range in the chilled cabinets. And then we've got lots of brands, well-loved brands there. Our newest is Higgidy, so we're making some really exciting new products with Higgidy at the moment. And then we do kind of play our cards close to our chest, so we don't rely on an external business to do our distribution piece for us. And equally, we've got our own microbiology labs down in Cornwall, so that all of our testing is done in-house, and so we can rely on that. All of that means that we've got some really great, rich career paths on offer, but not necessarily above the radar, you know. So yeah, interesting world. In terms of the way that we do business, we were early adopters, I guess, of the sort of purpose and values led business model. So back in the 1980s, we developed our values, and we very much recruit with those values in mind, because we want to make sure that we bring in colleagues who are going to thrive in our business, and we want them to kind of come in and forge their career with us rather than see us as a job. We want them to see us as a career path. So moving on from there, so we're small in terms of early careers, and that's kind of deliberately so on my part. We've always focused on the quality of the experience over and above numbers. So rather than going for the kind of broad mud sticks approach and then holding on to a good few from a large number, we make sure that we're bringing in each individual person and really focusing on their development and their experience as they go through the programme. So we've got placement year students, and then just 6 on the graduate scheme through commercial and through technical. In terms of our challenges, I guess the perennial challenges on the left-hand side are that generally in the food industry, our career paths are not understood by the general public, and therefore school leavers and students, and we have to do a lot of work to kind of shine a light on what's available. And then around the employer brand, of course, because most of our food is own label food, we're competing with the retailers and the brands to get hold of talent. So again, we've always had to work hard on that piece, and that's an ongoing journey. I think what we've seen as additional challenges over the last sort of recruitment cycle in 2020, definitely around candidate uncertainty. That we've seen them sort of they've had a hard time, they've found it difficult studying, they're emotionally quite vulnerable, and they've gone for a kind of spread betting approach. So rather than choosing a handful of opportunities that they want to commit to, they've tended to go for a higher number of opportunities. Obviously, their priorities have changed, and this is reflecting some of what Becky's been saying earlier, and I'll come on to that in a moment. Again, like all of us, I guess we all went virtual, and the challenges that brought with it, and I guess the effective onboarding piece also plays into that well-being that Becky was talking about. So next slide. So in terms of kind of facts and figures, I guess, in 2020 we had 264 applications, up by 12% in 2021. Chatting to James about this, we know the difference has been as much as 30% in application numbers for some employers. We did have better attendance at recruitment day, but I think what that figure doesn't tell you is the hard work that went into making sure that we had 100% attendance. In terms of offers, we were, yes, the numbers look okay and look similar, but there was a lot more, again, communication, reassurance, thinking time before acceptances. So not quite as sturdy as the 2020 picture, even though the numbers look similar. And then in terms of starts, we, again, really huge amount of communication and effort's gone in, because we've had 3 withdrawn, retracted on the, signed the paperwork, and then they've had a different offer or a change of heart for good reasons, and we've gone to replace those. And actually we even held a kind of further recruitment day for our commercial graduates, because we wanted to make sure that we started with the full complement. And then, as we've said, where in 2020 we pulled out all the stops, our on-site recruitment day were the week before COVID lockdown, and I was determined to make sure that we saw those people in person and they had the experience of being with us. But unfortunately, we couldn't pull it off for 2021, so we did go virtual. So next slide, please. So in terms of our recruitment process, in 2020, as I said, we were absolutely in person, and one of the really important aspects of that for us is that they get the opportunity to go inside the factory for themselves, you know, and have a bakery tour, see our teams doing the do, see the products go down the line. There's a real buzz and excitement when they come back out of that scenario. And then what we ask them to do is do a kind of first impressions feedback from us, and it tells us a real lot about how they're genuinely felt about the business, and what do they naturally pick up on about what we do. We couldn't do that this year, and we were really fortunate because the BBC did a documentary of inside the factory at Ginsters, so we were able to do a bit of a sort of celebrity screening for our candidates, and then use the same format of them giving us feedback. But it was nowhere near for them as rich an experience as we, you know, it was just our second best and as good as we could make it. In terms of assessors, normally I'm really going through with them really carefully about what the criteria, what's the, you know, on the recruitment day, making sure that they're really sort of objective and balanced. 2021 we did all that, but we booked extra time for assessor briefs, and we went into more effort and detail around really understanding that candidates are in their home environment, they might be distracted, their body language might be different, they might be, you know, sitting on a bed, which is, you know, you don't feel professional when you're sitting on a bed, all of that sort of thing. So they're going to present very differently to the normal. And we also went really heavy on, it is absolutely your responsibility as a manager of this business to make the values of this business, make them feel like they're joining the team. Really, we've got one shot at making a connection. So you're not sitting here with your clipboard and pen, you're here to make that connection as well. We always do ask current grads or placement students to come and have lunch with the candidates on a recruitment day. And that's always you know, a big hit. We're not there for that. Us grown-ups are not around for that part, and it means that they can ask all the difficult questions and they're starting to make some of those social bonds. We couldn't do that this year again in the same way, so they couldn't sit and eat together, which is a real kind of human basic bonding experience, isn't it? But we did do that virtually, and we also ran a concierge room down the side of all of our recruitment day. So I'm very fortunate to have a sort of people advisor who works full time with me, just focusing on early careers, and he's kind of only 5-6 years post grad himself. What he does is a really good job around building that connection and that concierge piece. He bridges really well between, you know, us old people and you know, our candidate population, and he's just there on hand if they have a wobbly moment or they just want to get their nerves out. He's there all day for them. And then in 2020 we absolutely sort of identified in the wash-up who's our, you know, who do we want to offer, but then who's our reserve candidate. This year we literally went through every single candidate and identified, you know, maybe even 3 or 4 reserves, and you know, what a good job we did that. And I think that will be something that we stick with going forwards, because we will stay in touch with even the ones that we didn't end up going to offer to backfill where we had declines. We'll still stay in touch with them. We would still look to bring them into the business. We'll talk to them about opportunities in the coming months, because it doesn't necessarily follow that, you know, they haven't found their next step, or it might be that, you know, we stay in touch with them in the long term and they come back, you know, as a second job, for example. So that was a good learn. Next slide, please. So this is about what we noticed, and you know, it was a small number of candidates. Admittedly, you know, we're not recruiting for scores of roles, but interesting for me to hear that Becky's thoughts this morning, the research bears some of this out. So we had a lot less questions around the facts, around salary and that kind of thing, but there was a lot of question around where will my placements be. You know, we all of our placements are 6-month placements in real job roles, in real teams with real objectives. And we were able to describe that and articulate it. But I guess there's been a real focus on where will it be and what level of working from home. And it doesn't necessarily follow that they've got an ambition to work from home. I think it's more about, if I'm asked to work from home, what will that look like? What will the support be? How will it work? You know, and what about all the practicalities? Again, there is a huge interest in the wellbeing piece. So we have got quite a good offering around that. As we started to just, normally we mention it and it's something we mention and then we bounce off, and there's a lot to get into a recruitment day. That was one that we actually got questions about, not had that before. So that was quite interesting. And then the last two is really, for me, quite interesting, because we have refreshed as a business our responsible business strategy over the last few months. I think one of my colleagues made a comment that, you know, COVID hasn't changed anything in this sphere, but it has accelerated the thinking. You know, we saw the kind of planet and Mother Nature flourish again when we were all in lockdown, and I think it's really switched us on to that piece. And candidates are passionate about it, and they want not just to know that the business is focusing on these priorities, but how do they get involved? How do they make a difference? How do they work with local communities? How are they going to be part of a project? You know, how does their day-to-day role impact, you know, have an impact in these areas? And that was a really key topic of conversation, where, you know, in previous years, salary and all that kind of career ambitions was the big, you know, topic. Next slide, nearly there. So overall, definite win on efficiency, because, you know, you can kind of put your, nobody's traveling and you haven't got to move people between rooms or any of that. So it's kind of cost efficient, time efficient. Overall, less paper because we're emailing, we're using technology, less travel because we're not bringing candidates in from afar or assessors. So happier planet. But and then I guess the geography advantage for me, on one particular recruitment day, we had a candidate from Australia beaming in. You know, she'd had to set her alarm clock for whatever ungodly hour in the morning it was, but you know, she was able to be with us when, you know, we just wouldn't have been able to attract that candidate into the process. So that was great. I think the other win, and I have to say, and I know James is going to smile on this, but it's really cemented our relationship with Cohesion, because, you know, it was tough. We had to do a lot more communicating. And one of the reasons that we chose to work with Cohesion in the first place was that it felt like they would be an extension of our team. And it actually now feels that we're all part of the same team, because we've been through this together. And actually, I don't foresee that will change in future years, really. In terms of drawbacks, the biggest one for me is that we are absolutely all about the experience and the connection that we get with our candidates, because we want them to be part of our team for years to come. And the virtual did feel like we couldn't quite get our hands on that. As I said, lots more communication and preparation, lots more legwork, and it was just all the way through, and it still is because they're not all in yet, but it's just nail-biting stuff this year. It's lot more edgy than it was in previous years. And I think then we've got a last slide. So yes, what we'll take away, I guess, is that opportunity to make a difference is something that we really need to articulate really well, because it absolutely exists in our business. You know, we've been key workers all the way through, and we've got a real opportunity to make a huge difference with the way that we do business. Enriching our programs in terms of development, in terms of how to that opportunity to make a difference, and really start to create some really good stories that we can use for the employer brand, but actually that they'll naturally want to share with upcoming candidates. And then just revisiting again on the all-round support. We do loads already, but we constantly refreshing and looking back. And I think there are a number of lessons we've learned that this year that we will absolutely hang on to and do better. And the big question, I guess, that everybody's asking themselves at the moment is, do we stay virtual or not? The short answer to that is I don't know at the moment. We want to, when the candidates are in and settled, we want to go back and talk to them about their experience. We're talking to the candidates that we recruited in person last year, and we want to do a bit of a compare and contrast. I think we'll probably go part and part, but what that looks like, but I'll let my creativity run when we've got some more information. So that's it for me. I'm really happy to, if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn and ask any questions or get into a bit of a discussion, I'm more than happy to make new friends. So feel welcome to do that.
Victoria, thank you very much indeed. That was really interesting, and what a lovely segue. Do we stay virtual or not? What a lovely segue into Tom, our next speaker. I think very often sort of, change is often that driver for innovation, isn't it? And I think what's going to be really interesting is, I think, the industry has got to make a concerted effort to learn from all of the lessons that we've all learned over the last 18 months and really try and commit to keeping those, and not to default back into old habits. It's very easy to kind of, revert back to bad habits. But I think, I don't know if anyone else has picked up on this, but there's one word that keeps on coming up in the conversations today, and that's connection as well. So, absolutely, let's embrace technology and benefit from that, but let's not forget about that sort of human interaction and connection element. But no, Victoria, that was fantastic. Thank you. So last but not least, Tom, Chief Executive of Tasio. Really looking forward to hearing your thoughts in terms of how your business has evolved and how you've adapted over the last 18 months, and I suppose where you think things are going to progress to. So Tom, over to you.
Thank you, James. Thanks very much, and welcome everybody. So if we can have the next slide, please. So basically, who's Tasio? So there's a bit of a background. What I'd like to sort of do for those of you who don't know who we are. I set the company up, well, it's actually 11 years ago now, so it's over 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And we started out as a video interviewing platform. We then sort of expanded into all the other types of online assessments and what have you. And then about 3 years ago, I suppose the big change was when we started working with the NHS, who basically asked us if we could create some technology to help them with actual live, this is when we were still doing in-person assessment centres, but to actually streamline a lot of the scoring of candidates and the admin side of things, really. So they were looking for more of an efficient programme, a way of actually delivering their assessment centres. And then, of course, as we all know, 18 months ago, this horrible pandemic hit and everything sort of changed. It almost overnight. And we kind of went through this phase where everybody was going, okay, great. What do we do now? So initial panic, everybody stopped for a matter of weeks. And then amazingly, from our experience, that what happened was that within literally what seemed to be a matter of weeks or maybe months, everybody said, right, okay, well, we still need to recruit. We're going to have to move this into different ways. So we're going to have to adapt. So how do we do that? How do we actually move everybody onto an online platform, and how do we do it virtually? So I know a lot of companies were trying different ways, so fantastic use of Zoom and Teams and all this kind of things, and they were trying to hack it all together really into a way of delivering a process that was good for the candidates. What we then did really was develop our platform, and I think it was interesting, both the speakers previously have said, was that it was a case of adapting things and moving quickly and changing and learning, I guess, and certainly we felt that very much from ourselves, so that we've had to learn an awful lot. And I think our sort of education and our changes over the last 18 months has been amazing, where we started out to where we are today and what we know today. Going forward, as I say, we've got some sort of bits and pieces around developing our product and what we want to do in the future and develop that, and we've got some exciting things coming along as well. But I think probably more importantly, really what we're actually all about, though, and what we need to remember is fundamentally as a business, what we're about is trying to help organisations and companies and employers actually understand where the potential is in their candidates, or also a lot of what we do is with their existing employees as well. So that's really what we're about as a business. It's basically hoping to expose that potential that each individual has, and then make that more visible. If we could have the next slide then, please. Okay, so some of the advantages of virtual assessment centres. Now, obviously, I know these have been picked up again in previous, and we've seen these. So I guess the first one would be the being able to assess any time and anywhere. Again, it removes those geographical boundaries. It makes it much easier for candidates to attend an assessment centre. They can, I think somebody said earlier, you know, just sit on their bed and join a meeting. They don't have to jump on a train or travel overnight. So that's been a real help. Equally as well, from an assessor's perspective, again, we've seen a massive benefits as well as terms of assessors, because again, they're not either, you know, they can take maybe a couple of hours out of their day, log in from wherever they're working. Of course, obviously in the last year, 18 months, they may well have been working from home. Again, it makes it a lot easier from that perspective. It's certainly reduced the cost. Again, travel, there's no need to hire venues if you haven't got that available, all that kind of thing. There's a couple of other benefits we've got here as well, things like securing documents. Again, we can share documents with candidates for a time-limited period, all that kind of information. Less time required. Again, that's an interesting one. I think as Vicky sort of alluded to earlier, it's potentially less time when you're actually doing the event, but there can be a lot more preparation. And a few of the things I'll come on to in a minute as well that we've helped customers with, I think really important to the preparation side of things. And that can take time to get that right. I think from our perspective, and this is not just on the virtual side of things, but using the technology platform that we've developed, I think the important thing that we find is that you can produce, or you can run, a very fair and consistent process. What we tend to do is, the way the platform works is that, again, there's a lot more upfront in terms of creating the event and creating the scoring frameworks and the structure to how you're going to interview and the assessments that you're going to get candidates to complete, or the exercises you want them to complete. But that can actually then produce a very structured approach, which, again, from an assessor perspective, and we're aware that assessors aren't always, you know, they're not professional assessors in a lot of scenarios. They are line managers, or they're people that, you know, from within the business that have been pulled in. So it's not something they're necessarily doing every day. So I think we find that the technology really helps in terms of giving that structure and making it a very fair and consistent process. Again, some of the sort of time saving comes around the scheduling. Again, it can be a bit easier from that perspective. As I say, we're not trying to juggle diaries, getting people in the right place at the right time. It makes that easier. And then another really important one that we're finding now, especially in terms of the candidate's perception, is being able to give that automated feedback reports. Again, you know, our experience with our customers is that candidates really appreciate a detailed feedback. You know, how did I do? What did I do well on? What did I maybe not do quite so well on? Where can I improve? What should I you know, what other areas should I be considering around that? And again, part of the platform that we offer enables that to be done very efficiently. So a lot of the comments and the scoring can be built straight into a report, which can be fed back very easily to the candidates via email, and fairly rapidly as well. And then we've got the usual bits and pieces around integrating with other platforms helps, you know, other test providers. So again, we sort of act as a conduit to those other test providers and act as a platform to host those as well. So again, where we've done in the past, a lot of customers would do aptitude tests, psychometric tests as part of an assessment centre day. We can bring that all into the one platform and do that either in advance of the actual day itself, so that can be more focused on the sort of in-person exercises. But then all that information is in one place. So from an assessor perspective, they've got the full picture when they're making those decisions and come to the wash up at the end of the day. And again, I think as mentioned earlier, you know, environmentally friendly. There's less transport, there's less travel, and again, that's obviously got to be a great thing. So again, if we could have the next slide, please, that would be great. So yes, there are, now I've put perceived disadvantage, or we've put perceived disadvantages. Again, I think this is important, because again, this is some of the considerations that both an assessor and a candidate think. Some of these I think are perceived, some of these are actually very true as well, and realistic, and there are areas that we need to address, certainly. So I guess the first one is around requires specialist technology. Again, nowadays that's really not so much of an issue, and we'll touch on that in a minute. I think the other thing that I think Victoria mentioned as well is harder to score the social interaction. It's getting that, obviously, with a face-to-face, you know, or an in-room, you know, you've got everybody sat around a table having lunch, you can see how they're interacting. Yeah, it's much harder to do that in a virtual environment. And I think it's interesting you said that you did a virtual lunch. Again, we've got a few other customers that do that. So they'll kind of have a more informal, everybody's on the call kind of thing like this today, and you know, they're all chatting and trying to do that. So that's a better way. Again, the in-person, it's impersonal. Yeah, it's not, you know, you're not shaking hands, you're not seeing somebody really close up eye to eye. So there is that. I think the candidates being quiet, or the quieter candidates, or more introverted candidates, or those that are maybe more technology averse, don't like being on video. I have to say I found that really less of an issue, really. I think most certainly I've got a 14-year-old daughter who spends all her time on screens and videos and recording stuff. So I think, the younger generation, it doesn't seem to be so much of an issue. I think for my age group, it would probably be terrifying, but I think for the younger, they seem to be quite happy with it. Again, there can be this concerns over DNI. We know that's a really big issue now. And again, that's something we think, again, concerns that it's expensive, can't offer physical tests. So again, I'm not sure with Victoria what you sort of do, and then you're sort of walking them around the bakery and things like that, where they used to get them to do physical thing, actual tests online, things like that. Obviously, you can't do that. That said, we've moved a lot of the physical tests actually online where we can, and we can replicate those in some of the ways. And we've done some really exciting things around that in the past. Again, some of the assessors not being digitally ready, that has been a bigger issue than actually the candidates, way bigger issue from our perspective in terms of candidates. I won't mention the employers that we've worked with, but we have certain employers that, we really struggle with getting their assessors up to speed with, this is the technology, this is how you use it. I mean, literally to the point of what is the internet, where do I log on, what's a browser, that kind of thing. So we have to sort of bring them along with us. So again, if we could have the next slide then, please, that'd be great. Thank you. So again, how do we overcome these issues and how do we get things to work? So specialist tech, again, 99% of 16 to 44-year-olds apparently have access to, according to the ONS, have access to a computer that they can do this. We've got candidates now that complete on their phones, on tablet devices. Again, phones aren't ideal because they're so small and you're trying to pack in a lot of information, but it can be done. We can support that if we need to. The scoring of social interactions, again, the way that we've tended to overcome that with customers or help them to overcome that is maybe looking at more immersive or fun exercises online. We've got one client that this year they ran an escape the room exercise. And again, that worked exceptionally well, and that the candidates, because it was a bit more of a gamified sort of solution, they got so involved, they were just working as teams, and they kind of forgot that they were online and they were being observed. So a bit like you would do in a physical event, but that seemed to work very well. The impersonal one, again, I know, Victoria, again, you mentioned very much that your brand values are really important to you as an organization, and it's how do you get those across. Again, similarly, we find that with a lot of customers, it's how do I get that across. And what we found is actually using a lot of video content or a lot of multimedia content to really deliver that. And again, it doesn't have to be necessarily massive budgets to go and create great corporate videos with the CEO and helicopter flights and drones and everything like that. A lot of our customers literally will use last year's grads or existing interns or whoever it may be, previous interns or whatever, and it's right, tell us what your job is, tell us what you do, what do you like about working here, that kind of thing. And that can be really helpful as well around talking about, say, for example, the D&I side of things. We work with a major construction company, and they were really pushing, they've been pushing over a number of years to try and increase the percentage of female applicants to roles. Again, it's not an industry that typically attracts a lot of female applicants, but it's builders, isn't it? You're thinking big hairy blokes, and well, it's not actually. A lot of these roles are really ideal. So again, they use videos of females within the role from previous years explaining what they like about the role, and that can be really helpful there as well. So again, I think looking at the quieter candidates, I think it's having that understanding that yes, things have changed there. Some people might be slightly more nervous because they're coming from home. They might have that issue around, oh, what if my internet drops out? What if I, all these kind of issues. So it's teaching the assessors to understand that and get them comfortable with that process and making sure they're looking at it as well. I think I touched earlier on the fair and consistent process, and I think that comes down to having a very structured assessment process, which we try and do a lot as well. Costs, certainly from our perspective, maybe we're underselling ourselves, but nearly every customer we talk to says they've saved a lot of money on this because, again, just makes life that much easier to do that kind of thing. As I say, the physical test, yeah, I mean, obviously we can't do, right, we want you to build a brick wall here, but, we can do a lot of other sort of online assessments now to assess those physical, those actual sort of skills as well. One of the examples we use actually from a few years ago, and wasn't actually a graduate scheme, but we actually created an online version of an assessment that one of the power companies used when they were looking to recruit these guys that install the digital, what they call smart meters in your house. And actually we do use a 3D sort of video image, or photographic image of a gas meter, and they had to spot and put pins on where they're things, but they could zoom in and round it. I think you've probably seen them on the shopping type of sites when you're looking at a bike or something. You can zoom in and zoom around. So a lot of these things can be transferred onto a virtual sort of environment. So yeah, the final thing really, I guess, to look at is which exercises work and translate well into a virtual world. So again, there's a lot of ones here. So we've got SJTs. Again, these can be really helpful situational judgment tests. These can be done in advance, or they can be done on the day, or while one cohort of candidates are doing live interviews, another cohort can be going off and doing their SJTs. Great way of assessing candidates' values and understanding, explaining this is the organisation. Again, we do a lot of those with customers. One we've introduced recently here is the virtual desktop. So again, if you want to try, obviously, if it's a more of an office-based role or that kind of thing, what would the day in the life of that a candidate look like when they came to work for you? So a bit more of an extreme example, but one that we've done recently for one of the police departments, for police authorities, was around the call handlers. So it's a really stressful job. They've got to listen to the telephone call coming in. And then what we did is we created a virtual desktop environment where they would be listening to a call. They would be completing an assessment. So they need to put data in and things like that. And then they would get interrupted by a telephone call. They'd have to listen to it. They'd have to answer questions about the call that they heard, put that information. So it was really replicating, this is what you'll be doing in the job day to day. And that could be a really useful way of doing it. And, you can do things like, what would you prioritize here? A new email comes in, this changes everything. Now, what do you do? That kind of thing. So that's a really good way of doing those kind of assessments. Mention the escape the room one. That's again just a teamwork assessment. How do people work together as a group of people, but makes it fun, more interesting. Obviously, again, we've got the group role plays, group presentations. Again, it's a bit Big Brother in a way, but you can kind of, right, from an assessor perspective, you can switch your cameras off. You can just be observing mode. So right, you guys go on with it. Let's prepare for this presentation. What are you going to do here? It can be done. Obviously, one-to-one interviews are great, or one-to-many interviews where you've got a group of assessors assessing candidates. They can work very well now, and panel interviews as well. And then we've got, as I say, obviously the psychometric test, the aptitude test, which can all be run either as part of the virtual event and the day, or they can be done at the same time. I think just I'm mindful of time now, just to sort of wrap up some of the things I'd like to share that we've worked with customers on that to really help things is, one of the ones interesting, we work with Gucci. We've done their graduate scheme for this year, and a lot of the training that we did with their assessors in advance, what we actually did was we split them up into two groups, and we said, right, you guys are going to be the assessors, you're going to be the candidates. So they actually did it from both sides of the process. So those that were going to be candidates could actually see what it was like from a candidate perspective. So they would log into our, what we call a candidate portal. They would see the videos, they would see the information that they needed to do. One of the exercises they had to do was a personal SWOT analysis. So they had to download a document, complete the SWOT analysis, upload it, and then they would discuss it over with the assessors. So we'd let the candidates and let the assessors play both parts, so they could see it from both sides of the sort of exercise, as it were. And that really helped in terms of giving them the perception, okay, this is what the candidate's actually going to go through. This is what they're seeing, so I can understand what they're like, what's going to be like for them. Another thing we did with them as well, and we do with a lot of clients, is we also then do, if you've seen it, there's a company called Loom, do these little short video clips, and it's really easy to just record videos. So we'll talk them through, okay, if you need to, send a candidate a document, this is how you do it. This is how you start your video interview with a candidate. This is how you do it. So they can log in quickly, they can watch a short 2-minute video and get updated about, this is how you do that, that kind of thing. Again, having that ability to communicate offline almost, or sort of secondary as well, between assessors, we find helps very well. Again, when I was talking to one of our customer success managers this morning, and she was sort of saying they've actually got we've got one client who has a WhatsApp group that runs alongside, because they said a lot of the assessors were feeling, it used to be quite a nice time. We'd all get together, we'd have a chat, we'd have a bit of conversation, get a catch up. We kind of missed that. So they almost had like a little WhatsApp group going alongside. So they'd be doing the day, but then they'd be catching, hey, how are you getting on? Are you enjoying this? So again, makes it that bit more personal, those kind of things. So, so yeah, there's lots of ways that we can help. As I say, I think earlier on, it's really been a massive learning curve for us, certainly in terms of developing the product and developing the way that we deliver it. But, from my perspective, I think, again, talking to most of our customers, I think, like Vicky said, I think there is this thing that, yeah, we probably will do either some virtual or a hybrid or something. You know, we won't go back to the way that we also used to do it. I mean, certainly, even if it's, you know, with like our platform as it was originally designed, you know, in person, we've got one thing that you can log in, you've got all the information, you put it into one place. You know, you haven't got scraps of paper that you're writing notes down about this candidate, and, you know, and then you've got to put all that data in after. And again, that's one of the biggest feedbacks we've had around, one of the positives from assessors and companies, that, you know, it's all in one place. It's easy to see. We can then just, you know, enter the data, then be able to access it and compare candidates, see when you do the wash up and how they scored and who's done well and what have you, all consistently. So that's it really from my perspective. So yeah, thanks for the time, James, and yeah, happy to answer any questions as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tom. Yeah, and I know working from you, you know, I'm working with you. I think, you know, at the beginning of the year, there was a natural hesitancy or nervousness about pushing so much online. But there's been a resounding, you know, the feedback that we get from both candidates, clients, everybody in the process is that it's been a resounding success. And I think technology is absolutely going to play a pivotal part moving forward. I think with the context that they are given the support and given the sort of, you know, signposting to sort of talk them through the various stages. I'm conscious we're sort of running up to our hour, so I know people might have to dash. Thank you everyone for joining today. In a minute, we're going to see if we can get a few questions. I think we've heard a lot this morning about the sort of rapidly changing environment that we're facing, the need for agility and the need for flexibility, and also that sort of social responsibility element as well. I don't know if anyone's, I'm sure everyone's heard obviously the news with Brewdog, you know, in the news about obviously all the issues that they've had there, which really I think underpins the sort of necessity, I suppose, for leaders moving forwards and, you know, early talent progressing through the ranks to have that, I suppose, you know, their inclusive behavior and sort of within their all aspects of their management, and sort of, I suppose, proactive in the way that they work. And I think in response to that, we've almost seen that there's a bit of a gap in terms of the existing psychometric tests and various sort of testing platforms, how they assess that area. And just very quickly before we wrap up, we're actually working alongside a number of industry and online test providers to look at developing a concept called pro-social, which is going to test and look at all of those slightly different areas which we feel there's a bit of a gap in. So it's very early stages of the process, but I just wanted to use this forum as an opportunity to put it out there. If any organization would like to form part of that building blocks of that sort of structure and testing platform, please feel free to get in touch, because I think it's going to be a really exciting area to sort of test as we move forward. But thank you everyone for coming today and making time in your diary. Eddie, if I hand over to you, if we've got a couple of minutes just to sort of answer any questions if there are any, and then we can sort of wrap up from there. So Eddie, if I pass over to you, and then we can go through some of the questions and ask some of the panelists for their responses.
Yeah, no problem. Cheers, James. Thank you. And thanks to all our panelists as well. Some really, really insightful stuff. So a couple of questions have come in on the chat. The first one is from Ben at Stenten for you, Becky. And it's just around comments about how the assessment process in particular affected the likelihood of candidates to accept an offer or not. So, you know, were these candidates, was it important for them to learn about the role through relevant looking assessment centres? And you know, was there any link between multiple stages and pulling out of assessment centres if we put too many rounds or sifting rounds in?
So we didn't actually ask Eddie in this round of research, but specifically about assessment centres, but it's something we could perhaps look to do in the future and work together on. However, you know, what I do know is certainly early stages, you know, availability of being able to do virtual, online, you know, much of what we've heard today does make it much more accessible. However, when it comes to the later stages of the recruitment process, and certainly that onboarding piece and the sort of reassurance around am I going to fit in, being able to do some of the things that were talked about, you know, the lunches, going in and seeing the environment, knowing what it's like when you're going to be there, meeting other people are much more powerful to really give those applicants, those students, that confidence around starting and make sure that they're onboarded in the right way. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and you know, I'd love to do some more research on it. So hopefully we could look to do that and perhaps share at a later date.
Excellent. I think you touched on onboarding there as well. I've actually had a question come in over email, and it's going to be directed at yourself, Victoria. And it's just around increasing touch points throughout the recruitment process. I know, obviously, with it being virtual and the work we did together through the virtual recruitment process, have you seen any changes to your onboarding process for once candidates have received an offer? So, for example, you know, have you put more touch points in? Are you able to get candidates in? And obviously, post-COVID, have you done anything differently in this year's onboarding process?
Yeah, so we, I guess last year, so 2020, we was our first real concerted effort around that pre-boarding, onboarding piece. So we had a number of touch points, but we were sort of trying to find our level. This year, we've just gone belt and braces, really. So as soon as candidates have accepted, then Ashley will give them a ring, chat to them, and it's quite informal. So they'll all be put in a WhatsApp group together so they can start to get to know each other straight away. We have a relocation guide to the different parts of the country. We asked the line managers to get in touch with them pretty much sort of, you know, 2-3 months before start date. So we're starting to build the relationships. We encourage them to connect with the current grads or placement students that they've already met. So as much as possible, we're building as many layers of connections. It's not just about, you know, sending a bit of information here and then the next text goes out there. And it's more about trying to get a rich number of connections on different levels.
Excellent. Thank you. Sorry, I just put myself on mute. I am conscious of time, so I will hand back to James shortly, but I think we've got time for just one more, and it's just come into myself via email. And again, it is for you, Becky. I think there was a statistic earlier around the prestige of apprenticeships. I think the number was that 4% of your candidate, or 4% of the people you interviewed would associate the word prestigious with an apprenticeship. So in your opinion, what more can employers do to help remove that stigma of apprenticeships in early talent?
I think it's some of those things that we talked around the longer term career prospects, the fact that an apprenticeship is a job, and that you don't, if it's a degree apprenticeship, for example, you don't come out with anything less than someone studying a degree. And in fact, in many cases, it could be more because you've got that practical workplace-based experience. But I still think there's the research shows that there's a lack of understanding of that, and there's a lack of real, also, not just from the students, but from teachers, from parents. So I think there needs to be much more done around the longer term career prospects and just just educating people on what an apprenticeship means. I think there's that sort of backdated stigma that it's some of the more traditional roles, but actually, a lot of the roles that we're seeing are professional service roles, apprenticeships in engineering, IT, and how important those roles are for businesses. I think it's just about communicating that in the right way so it resonates with the students, but also really importantly the influencers.
Brilliant. No, that's a really, really good comprehensive answer. I think that's very insightful. So thank you for that. I am conscious of time, and I know we've got a few more questions in the chat, so I'll collate those and we'll get them to the panelists, and we'll circulate the answers following this. But as I said, I'm conscious of time, so I'll hand back over to James to wrap up.
Perfect. Thanks, Eddie. Yeah. Again, thank you everyone for your time today. Just as a sort of follow up and action now, obviously we're going to collate all of the data and questions as well, and share that with everyone that's been in attendance today, and also a number of people who weren't able to attend. And I think that last point about kind of what we can do to raise awareness. Interestingly, we're going to be hosting another webinar in, I think, in October, looking at the value and the benefit of school outreach programs and looking at apprenticeship programs, kickstart schemes, etc. And I think one thing Becky touched on earlier is students are starting to research and look at opportunities at an earlier and earlier point within their career. So the ability and the benefit of going out to school leavers and starting to bridge that gap between their time at school and their transition into employment, I think is really, really key. So without plugging it, that will be our next event, and it would be great to see as many of you join for that one as well. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. I'll let everyone disappear and get on with their normal day, and thank you again very much to our speakers for providing the context and sort of insight that they've shared with us. So thank you very much indeed.